Welcome to episode 3. On this series, we've been discussing with our subject matter experts topics related to ABA and adult services. So we're navigating through some of these tough questions, some of these issues in regards to rights, autonomy, how to best serve adult populations from a behavior analytic lens. For folks who are BCBAs who have never worked with adult populations, or you're interested in learning more just about some of these different variables and contingencies with this sector of the field, we're really happy to have you. And we're super happy to have our 3 guests that are with us today. We're discussing ethics today. And as far as subject matter experts go, why not invite some people who wrote a literal book on the topic. They are the authors of the book, Daily Ethics: Creating Intentional Practice for Behavior Analysts. So welcome Tyra Sellers, Emily Patrizi, and Sarah Lichtenberger. Welcome. Can you each take a quick second and introduce yourselves to everybody? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. I'm Sarah. I am a senior account manager at Behavior Live. So if you have done a presentation on Behavior Live, you probably saw me doing a tech check or saw my name in the chat if you attended one, because I was answering your support ticket questions. I am a Western Michigan graduate, so I know a handful of the folks here, which is wonderful. And yeah, I've had a lovely opportunity to be supervised by my 2 co-authors. I think that answers one of your coming up questions, and work with both of them in different contexts. But I've done a handful of clinical work. I also had the opportunity to work in the ethics department of the BACB for a period of time, and also hold the position of director of clinical standards at Verbal Beginnings for a period of time as well.
Awesome. My name's Emily. I don't have the pleasure of knowing anyone on this call, I don't think, but I've been in the field for about 20 years, started in education and actually worked in group homes with elderly adults. So very excited to be here and meet with you and hear more about some of the unique opportunities that you navigate. I am currently at Stride Autism Centers as the COO. I previously worked at Trumpet Behavioral Health as the COO and have worked across a variety of different clinical and operational roles over the years, and have had the pleasure of working directly with Tyra and Sarah, and are now good friends and co-authors with them. So thanks for having us.
I guess that leaves me. So thanks for going first and second, Emily. So nice to have this time with you all. I'm Tyra. I have been in the profession like 35 plus years. I actually started doing tutoring kind of on this path in junior high school, but started working as a what would today be a behavior tech or an RBT in the early 90s. So I was like 5 years old, and I've had a variety of positions within our profession. Most of my career I've spent doing clinical work. Well, I would say early and mid-career, mostly clinical work. And I also was professor at Utah State University for a little while, and worked at the BACB in the ethics department. Have had my own company a few different times and done contract consultation type work, and I'm currently the CEO of the Association of Professional Behavior Analysts. And if you're not aware of what that is, it is our profession's sort of primary professional practitioner membership organization.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for being here. Your experience is so vital, I think, to this conversation. It's going to be really, really amazing to talk to you about ethics, because obviously you all have a long history navigating the various contingencies and variables to do with the topic. Let's maybe introduce your book first. Tell us a little bit about maybe the inspiration behind it, the detail and work that went into it, and how you 3 got together and collaborated on that.
Sure, I can.
Okay. I'm going to actually get started on this one, Emily, for just like an intro, and then I'll turn it over to you. But this book, for me personally, has been years in the making as an idea. So I had this idea for a very applied book, because there really, aside from workbooks on scenarios, there really wasn't anything out there that spoke to practitioners and wasn't really linked to a particular code of ethics. And I was concerned, especially as I started teaching ethics, that we all taught it and maybe still teach it in a way that links it really closely to our ethics code, which has certain benefits, but also I think has certain drawbacks. And so this was an idea, along with a few others, that had been rolling around in my head for a long time, and just never had the time or the opportunity. But I've known Emily forever, like since, I don't know, 2012, maybe. Emily, is that right? Is that when we first started working together at Trumpet? Yeah.
Yep, a little before that, but yeah, right around then.
I think that's right. Yeah. And then so when I left the BACB, I then had an opportunity to work on this kind of content, because I couldn't understandably work on it while I was in the ethics department. So so I'm going to let Emily tell the rest, but that's kind of what it started as, this idea that for a need for something practical. And then I was like, hey, Emily, what do you think of this idea?
Love it. Love the handoff. Yes. And I was going to say that this was really Tyra's brainchild. And when she brought it up to me initially, I was like, yes, that makes perfect sense. And in my career up till that, well, in my early career, for me, ethics was Bailey and Birch code of ethics. Like it was, that was like all I had really like formally learned. And in my practice, I had several late night phone calls to Tyra saying, what do I do? Like this happened, what do I do? And so some of the discussion and the foundation and background really focuses in on being intentional and thoughtful and responsive and proactive to help our future selves and to help ourselves and others be aware and proactive about how we are cultivating this practice of ethics instead of reacting to the bad things that happen. And in doing that, the other benefit that we talked through was ethics can often be a scary, like bad, negative thing that we lean away from. And when we proactively address it, like on our own terms, and make space and time and create a space of compassion and understanding and openness and grace, you can learn and strengthen your ethics repertoire in a way that positions you to be pretty successful, or more successful, more prepared when you are confronted with really tough things, and increases the likelihood that we'll contact reinforcement and we'll lean into the hard things as opposed to doing everything possible to avoid them. And then we brought Sarah on board, and she was super excited and so grateful for her expertise and history and experiences, and how she's also contributed to the book today. So Sarah, pass it to you.
All I will add is that I finally got to use my English degree. But they said, yes, they said everything else that was with it. But I was lucky enough to be asked to join them. And at the very end, I think, or towards the end of it, or after they'd been talking about it and working on it for a while. And it was a lovely experience to get to talk through it together and write it together, and especially working in the ethics department. I think what I learned is that it's really hard to cover, as you all know, everything you need to know to be an effective behavior analyst in a short period of time in your coursework and in your supervision. And a lot of people struggle with ethics and how to think about it and how to talk about it. And a lot of it comes down to the training that's provided and how we're talking about ethics. And so it was really cool to think about creating something that can hopefully help fill that gap.
Yeah, very cool. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say,
Oh.
and I got to work with two of my favorite people, but sorry, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Nothing wrong. No, nothing wrong with that. That's awesome. Emily, you mentioned like the leaning into some of the scarier topics or more difficult things to talk about. And I've noticed in looking at the book, there's a lot of elements of ACT found in the book where, there's some committed action, some self-reflection, things like that. Was ACT obviously something that was used and utilized in making the book, but how can ACT and what principles of ACT can really inform our ethical practice and ethical decision making?
Yeah, this is Tyra's area of expertise, but I will say that, yes, I mean, I think that ACT in different fields in different ways has different terms and ways of thinking about it, but we absolutely recognize the value in integrating different strategies, as you mentioned, being aware and reflective and showing up with intention. We wanted to include that in the title of the book, and we often talk about intentional in terms of doing things on purpose is how I think about it. You're fully present and aware and you do it on purpose. And so definitely incorporated some of the different components, and then Ty can provide some more context.
I just want to share that hopefully it's okay to share this, Sarah and Emily, but when you sent us the questions ahead of time, Emily and Sarah were like, we don't want to handle question 7. And I was like, what is question 7? I didn't remember. And so I went and looked it up and I was like, oh, okay. So, listen, here's what I will say. Neither of us are licensed clinical psychologists or mental health practitioners. We're just straight up behavior analysts. Emily and I are of the special ed variety, disabilities discipline. And, none of us have any sort of official expertise in acceptance and commitment therapy. Or acceptance and commitment training, however you like to think about it, as appropriate
Sure.
for a behavior analyst, which probably depends on your scope of practice. If you are a licensed clinical practitioner, it might be in your scope of practice or your individual scope of competence, whatever extra training and certification you personally have. None of us have, I think, training that would say ACT is within our scope of competence as a therapeutic intervention, because that's just not what the three of us do. However, I think there are things that seem reasonable as a human that are also susceptible to a thoroughgoing behavioral conceptualization, like the benefit of accepting that sometimes you're going to experience shitty feelings, and that is probably
Sure.
going to make you, because you're a human, want to not interact with people or tasks or thoughts that produce those kinds of feelings. And when it comes to ethics, that might be one of those situations that produce those kinds of feelings, and engaging in escape and avoidant responses probably going to make the situation worse, unlikely to make it better. And so
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable that when people read the book, they sort of get this soupçon of actiness, which I think if you're ACT trained is a great thing, because ACT doesn't have a copyright on things like being in the present moment, right? That's not
Right.
a uniquely ACT component. And I think if people read it and feel like, ew, that feels acty, well, maybe I would invite those people to think about why they're responding that way, because none of us are claiming that this book is implementing ACT or telling people to implement ACT. and maybe make some space. So, you know, truthfully, the idea was that we wanted to write a book that was for practitioners, and we didn't want it to read like a textbook, or read like a journal article that would have been submitted to, you know, the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis, right? Which, I mean, that's the awesome thing,
Mhm.
but not what we were going for. And it turns out that folks that are trained in and practice ACT get a lot of training and know a lot about how to talk to people in a way that maybe will invite them to talk about content that is uncomfortable. And so I think that's what feels actish about our book. But we certainly aren't ACT practitioners. We're not ACT trained. But I'm very happy if it has that flavor, because what we wanted was something that felt approachable, acceptable, didn't make people feel like, oh, I'm gonna read all of these things and realize what a shitty behavior analyst I am and how I've been violating the ethics code, and now I'm like paralyzed and I can't do anything, right? So I think that would be my answer. I don't know if that's satisfactory, but I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions you or other folks might have.
No, I think it's good, not to speak for everybody else, but I think it's good because, and even in your title being a daily interaction, maybe some of the aversive nature of some of the circumstances and contingencies that you try to actively avoid in the context of ethics, um, presenting those things on a daily basis, like you guys have mapped out. I mean, it's literally a week by week, day by day, right? Can maybe subside some of those the aversive nature or some of those warning signals, and make it something that is a little more, some things are just hard to talk about and we don't want to deal with them until you can't avoid them anymore. And when you can't avoid them anymore, that's usually a time when maybe some emotional responding is elicited and things like that. So yeah, no, I definitely see the tie-in, but I understand the behavior analytic lens on that too. So um, oh, I see a hand raised. Steve, Dr. Sparks, go ahead.
I just want to add that Kyle came through more of a Moeller type program and was in, being a strict Skinnerian, I try not to hold it against him. But yeah, we see with our work with, assessing and treating severe behavior, we have people from both sides of the coin. And it really is just a difference in semantics and how we're talking about it, but we're doing a lot of the same things. And so I do think, restating it in a way that's digestible to everyone really is a good thing, because it's not something that's always been done in our field.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Steve's always berating me for that. No, I'm just kidding. So the book itself, I've gotten my hands on the book. It's amazing. Maybe for those who aren't familiar with it, I don't want to have any spoilers or anything like that, but maybe just kind of walk through what it looks like as a daily interaction with ethics and how you all set that up.
I'm going to leave Sarah and Emily to chat about that. But I will say daily was really purposeful, because this idea that you take a class and then you whip out the ethics code when you realize there's a problem probably isn't sufficient to build robust repertoires that will allow us to be fluent, and then that means that we're not catching all of the other things that maybe went unnoticed. But I'm going to let Sarah and Emily kind of walk through like the structure of the book and why.
Cool. Emily, okay if I start and you can jump in?
Go for it. Yeah.
Cool. So once you get to the parts that are focused on topics, we've split it up into, we call them bi-weekly pairs, but it's basically 2 weeks at a time. Each one covers a different topic that may or may not coincide with certain ethics code standards, but we don't specifically call them out. Up to you if you want to grab the ethics code and identify them as you read along. But that first week will prompt through the reader through thinking about the values that match for them to that particular topic. And then it goes through some of the risks and benefits, the antecedent strategies related to that particular ethical dilemma or topic, any red flags that people can try to identify, and then some considerations if you find yourself in this dilemma or issue, for addressing it, how you might approach it. And then it moves into weekly actions. So then there's some for each day of the week. So Monday is always going to be a think about it, and there's going to be some questions and prompts for you to think about that particular topic. Tuesday will prompt you to look for it. Wednesday will have you talk about it either with your colleagues, mentor, supervisor, maybe out loud to yourself if you're not working through the book with anyone else. Act on it is Thursday, and then reflect on it is Friday. So it takes you through 1 week. So it does require you to participate five days of the week, but hopefully it's small enough that it's not taking up too much time, and hopefully getting you in that practice of thinking about ethics every day. And then the second week moves into a scenario related to that topic. And then you have the opportunity to read it and then go through and identify all of those items you covered in that first week. And also think about, would you have approached that situation differently? Are there things that that person missed? Where there were some red flags they didn't respond to? We even coded it so you can go through and underline and star things in a certain way, depending on how it matches how you were thinking through things. And this is a book that you should write in. I'm very uncomfortable with that thought. I'm a sticky note person with notes, but we did add places for you to write things and highlight and hopefully actively engage with the book.
Yeah, I purchased the Kindle version, which was not, you can't write in that. I noticed that right away.
But yeah.
Mhm. I didn't know that about you, Sarah. I write in all my books. I take great joy in it. Tyra doesn't either. Yeah, I mean, that was a great summary. And then in the beginning of the book, we just provide some additional foundation to talk through each of those different sections that repeat, and how to really think about and best utilize them, like knowing your values, why your values important. I think especially in your scope, there are often scenarios in which like your values conflict with the ethics code, conflict with like other requirements and legal requirements, and it just becomes very, very complicated. And so the goal was really to provide, instead of just having answers to ethics questions, to really create a decision making framework, and a structure in which we can engage with important content and scenarios, to pull all the pieces together and collaborate with other individuals to talk through and problem solve and weigh pros and cons, risks and benefits, and work to best navigate the path through those ethical scenarios, because there, as we all know on this call, there's really never one answer, and it is often just very complicated, and it evolves as you engage and navigate and move forward. And so it's important to have that framework so that you can readily pivot, and continually evaluate the next best thing to do. I will say my 14-year-old daughter texted me and she said, "Mom, I'm reading your book." And I didn't know she was reading it. I did give her a copy. And she was like, "And it's so cool how you all like prompt and tell the reader like what to do and help facilitate learning, whether it's like highlighting, underlining." She's like, "I'm going to do that when I read other books too." And so she's like 14 going on 40. But so there's your 14-year-old review.
That's amazing. Yeah, there's a question. Steve, go ahead.
It sounds in a surprisingly novel idea that you're almost going with a shaping and reinforcement based process rather than the punishment in the field is always taken to this, which, yeah, I don't know if I should be more surprised that everybody hasn't thought of this ahead of time, or that I don't know, but was that intentional on your part to make it more reinforcement based because we know the power of reinforcement?
Yes.
Not for me, but I think that came out. So I'll let Emily and Sarah talk about how that sort of came out. For me, the way I started thinking about it was, it feels like we talk about ethics in response to bad stuff. And I have a law degree, and my bachelor's degree is in philosophy, super duper useful. But but if you study either of those two disciplines, that's not the approach. Like when you think about taking a behavior analytic approach to something, it's not in response to a problem. When you're a behavior analyst, it is your worldview. It is the way you see it. Like I don't think about, addressing an issue with my partner or getting the laundry done without taking a behavior analytic view. I can't, right? Like I can't like rub that out of my eyes. Similarly, because of my training with the law and with philosophy and specifically ethics, I don't, that also informs my worldview. And it felt like with ethics and behavior analysis, we talk about it as this thing to think about when there's a bad thing. And that means then that we're not using it as an antecedent strategy to minimize those bad things, but also to have a fuller, more compassionate, more human-centered approach to everything we do, which is fully in alignment and always has been with behavior analysis and applied behavior analysis. So for me, it wasn't purposefully about reinforcement versus punishment, and a little more about almost antecedent versus consequence approach. But Emily and Sarah, do you want to talk about that other piece? Because I think your clinical practice sort of informs thinking about it that way, like working with staff and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what you said. We didn't initially realize how that would grow and evolve and the significance and impact. But as we engaged with the material and each other, that definitely came to light. And I think is also reflected in like what we indicate, little icons like get comfy or like get a cup of tea or coffee, like just so that you can create space to deal with this type of content, like when you're not in a really stressful, escalated place. And that's not something that I at least had a history of doing. And so really redefining how to approach and interact with the content, and it really just kind of took on a life of its own. And it, to your point, Ty, like with clinical practice, I mean, it just makes perfect sense because many of the urgent like fire drill phone calls are around like ethics and questions and really, really tough situations with competing contingencies and significant outcomes. And depending on people's histories and skill sets and all sorts of things, it impacts people's lives. And so we wanted to create that space. And Steve, I love that you said that. It's the power of positive reinforcement. So.
Yeah,
Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Kyle.
No, I was going to say, I always find it strange. We try to do as much reinforcement based around here. Taylor loves being married to me because every time I do something to upset her, I'm just like, all right, well, let's talk about the motivating operations or SDs here. And she's like, and walks away. But it's something that I don't see enough of, I don't think, in our field where, we would do this as a strategy for someone we're working with, yet we're not trying to set up our systems in ways to take advantage of that. And so I think it's very cool you're doing that.
It is very cool. You mentioned so many good points. I have a lot of questions based on some of the points that you mentioned, but I'm going to ask too, how best do you walk through this book? Do you do it with a team of people? Can you read it individually? Can you do it with supervisees, RBTs? What's the format, or what do you recommend?
Yes. I love that question. We tried to be really intentional to write the book in a way that wasn't overly prescriptive. I mean, it definitely started that way because we're behavior analysts, right? So we were like, everything perfect, do it like this. And as we interacted with each other, but also as we interacted with our editor, who was phenomenal, she gave us some great suggestions and insights, and we just sort of kept trying to think more expansively. Like, so how how should this book be? It's not a textbook. Could it be used in a class? Yeah, sure, but it's not a textbook. So you should be able to read it by yourself. You should be able to read it with a colleague who is kind of at the same level as you. You should be able to read it with your supervisees and trainees. Trainees or supervisees or technicians should be able to read it together. You should be able to read it in a group format. We made a whole book club for the book, right? If you're like, yeah, we want to do this in a group format, like we've got you covered, because we really think that that's probably one of the better ways to do it. Now, I'm a control freak, so I would never do a book club without reading the book myself first. But I think that the book lends itself to doing a book club blind, like not reading, not being familiar. I think the person leading the book club should be familiar with the book. But honestly, I would be more interested in hearing from you all, Kyle and everybody else. How do you think the book, if you've looked at the book at all, like how do you think the book should be used? That'd be really cool to hear, because there may be ways we haven't thought of.
Put me in the hot seat then. No, that's a good question. Especially, yeah, and I wanted to tie this into adult services, excuse me, because there are considerations and dilemmas and just situations that the team that's in the audience today that we face that may be unfamiliar or just not contacted as often by folks that work more with the pediatric populations or younger populations. Namely, and I guess this does tie into one of the questions I had, namely just working with interdisciplinary teams coming into any case that we get referred to. We're automatically on a team with not only the individual themselves, but the guardian of that individual, OT, PT, psychiatrists, group home managers, group home staff, a bunch of people who bring kind of their own ethical framework into the mix. I asked for in my questionnaire some references or readings, and Tyra gave me this like amazing library full of things. I only got to read like 2 or 3 of them, but the one that I read, I wrote it down. Who wrote it? I think it was Rosenberg. I forget who wrote it, but the authors of the article that you sent talk about, for one, they talk about rule-based ethics, like this is how you do it, this is how you not do it, black and white, and how that's not always super helpful, but also that 2 people can have the same intentions but have different ethical codes coming into a situation. So I don't know if you have any input or ideas on working collaboratively with people who might view things differently than you. That's definitely a situation that we face quite often.
I was just putting I think.
Yeah, there it is.
Oh, I put it in twice. Sorry about that.
Yep, I see
yeah,
it.
that's a great article, and it also, you wouldn't know this from the title, but like the best part of that whole article is it has a really lovely sort of algorithm or flow chart for thinking about and addressing potential ethics violations or professional misconduct. And I've been leaning on saying professional misconduct more than possible ethics violations, because I think sometimes we do stuff that's not great, and we want to address it, but it might not actually be like an ethics issue. Anyway, sorry, that was my squirrel moment.
No.
But it's a great article, and Eileen Schwartz in particular has done a phenomenal amount of work around ethics and social validity in our profession. If you've not read her work, I highly suggest that you do that. But I think the idea is that what I would invite everybody to think about, and this is one of the reasons we didn't link our content specifically to the Behavior Analyst Certification Board's ethics code, is that if that ethics code didn't exist, if like I, had the gauntlets of power and had a Thanos moment and like erased it and it was gone, we would still likely behave in accordance with most of the things that are in that ethics code, because they are in alignment fairly consistently with our scientific approach to things, but also because they align with being a good human and those sorts of things. Now, there are some specifics to our practice that are in there, but like if you got rid of it, we would still do a lot of those same things, or should do a lot of those same things. And so I think there are far more similarities across our professions, adjacent professions, codes of ethics, than there are dissimilarities. And we get hung up on like, yeah, but psychologists can accept gifts, and if you're a board certified behavior analyst, you can't, blah, blah, blah. That's so like pedestrian to ethics, which is really about conducting yourself in a way that doesn't hurt other people and that bears the maximum benefit for them. I mean, it also doesn't hurt yourself, doesn't hurt your profession or your colleagues. So I think the way to approach working with others is to understand like no code of ethics is, like a stone tablet etched that we all have to adhere to, or we're going to be, struck down by lightning. Like, they're written by humans. They're not perfect. They're guidelines, honestly, even though there are obviously actionable consequences for not following. So probably we're more similar than dissimilar, and understanding that it's our job to not weaponize our code of ethics. Like, don't roll it up, and beat people about the head and shoulders with it. If you've got, a sped teacher or a PT or, a psychologist or a pediatrician, or look, even like your marketing team, and make them feel bad that they did something that doesn't align. They don't have to adhere to our code of ethics if they're not board certified. And there are plenty of behavior analysts that aren't board certified and aren't obligated to follow that code of ethics. Like, that code of ethics is tied to our certifying body. So take a functional approach, like understand that there are gray areas, be friendly and collegial and learn from other people. There are things in other professions' ethics code that are really awesome and that I hope show up in ours someday. So I don't know, that's kind of my take, is that I think just approaching the conversation from sort of what is our common goal, and that our code isn't better than your code, that kind of thing. Or I'm better because I adhere to my code and I do this thing versus yours. But Emily and Sarah, I don't know if you have specifics to add. And then Kyle, I don't know if you have follow-up specific to adult provider stuff, because that there are also legal implications when it comes to practicing with adults versus if you're someone that practices with little kids, that really isn't even about our code of ethics.
Yeah,
I feel very rambly. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
No, it's beautiful. One additional resource that I'm sure many of you on this call are familiar with is Crucial Conversations. And so to Tyra's point, I think sometimes we can get in our own way because we're either like holding information but not sharing it, or focused on that instead of our common goal. And so one of the main takeaways that I think about often is like, what is our shared pool of knowledge, and are we working from the same pool of information? And when we don't, we're communicating from different places, and we create gaps in understanding. And we know that when there are gaps, we typically fill them in ourselves and make assumptions or misinterpret information, perspectives, and it's not usually a good thing. And that's when we can get into conflict or defensiveness and really get us further away from our initial intent, which is collaboration and the opportunity to learn with each other and coordinate in a way that we can best support the outcomes for the individual we're serving. So I know that's a general resource, but if you haven't explored it, I mean, it is probably one of the books that I reference most frequently. So yeah, other great books are listed there. Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
Sorry, Emily. And what I'll add to what they both said is, I think doing an assessment of our own biases before going into those conversations, because I think especially the ones that we're not aware of that we might have picked up during our education and training when it comes to especially collaborating with other professionals, and just taking a moment to identify like, oh, yep, these are some biases I'm walking in with that I just need to be aware of, and catch myself if I'm starting to lean into them instead of taking a moment to take their perspective, lean into the crucial conversations, and making sure that everybody's able to achieve the same goal, because we are all usually arriving with the same goal to support our clients, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. We had Cody Morris on for our first episode talking about assent in adult services, and a lot of that ties in, talking from the collaboration standpoint, like finding a common ground first and foremost. Very difficult when some. As the Carnegie book suggests, some people are just more difficult to work with, but there can be common grounds, and if you're there at the table, you're there at the very least to serve that client, to help them live a more independent, autonomous life, and that's a good reminder that as you deal with people that may see things differently, that you're still coming from the same vantage point. So yeah, the other circumstance I was going to bring up is in adult services as behavior analysts, we, at least in our role with our organization, we're tasked with determining if restrictive strategies are appropriate or intrusive strategies are appropriate for a client. Those being strategies that, for a temporary period of time, somebody's rights would be changed, their ability to either access the community independently, access internet, food, a whole list of items due to the safety of themselves and others. We have the ability to make those determinations with a team and with an oversight behavior treatment committee overseeing the implementation of those strategies. And it should be a heavy thing to determine that somebody can't have something that, the average Joe down the street can have, you know what I mean? That's something that I feel like, at least when I'm writing those plans, like, oh man, this is something where I'm contacting some of my ethical compass here. How appropriate is this? Did I really cross all my T's and dot all my I's to make sure that this person has a really, really good, appropriate fading plan for this strategy? Are there enough proactive strategies in there to make sure that this won't be a permanent thing, that, at some point, the teaching is going to be sufficient enough that they're going to be able to, live more independent, autonomously without this strategy in place. So I don't know if there's any feedback on that, but that was just another situation that, that in the adult world that we face pretty regularly. Sparks team, I don't know if there's any other situations that came to mind or questions. Steve, go ahead.
I was just aching to talk. It's been too long. I'd say kind of on the other side of things, I was talking to Ron Van Houten just the other day. We were talking about a project one of his students was doing, and talking about the constraints. So we have a setting we've set up under a new company where we're going to be housing people with some of the most severe behavior and have a behavior analyst there 40 hours a week, teaching staff and working with them. And the constraints that we have through the mental health code and Medicaid laws prevents us from doing some of the very basic things that behavior analysts would just think it wouldn't be a big deal you'd be able to do. And so on the other side, we have this right to effective treatment, yet our hands are tied at some points based on federal laws and things like that. And we're kind of doing the best we can in those constraints. How does that fit into the ethical code or your ethical guidance on, all right, this would help them a lot faster, a lot better, but society says that's too restrictive?
That is a big question, Steve. I have several thoughts, and I'm sure Tyra and Sarah do as well. I don't have, we don't have a magic answer, and it sounds like based on what you and Kyle shared, you have a very strong, thoughtful framework already in place, in which you are able to navigate a decision-making tree and considerations through different levels of risk, benefit, pros and cons. And so that's excellent. I mean, that's the first thing to have in place. But another way that I think about this is like bucketing things that like you absolutely have to do, whether it's a payer contract or a funding source or the law, versus guidelines, and like kind of put them in buckets and then look at like what you're dealing with and what is an absolute like this has to happen, and then what is more of a consideration, and then how do those things impact the decision making process, and how and what you prioritize in terms of care. And one of the other things that came to mind when you were talking, and I love that the structure you have in place, it sounds like you have the ability to constantly reevaluate and rethink. And it's important that we never, like, for me, I think that we never normalize any type of restrictive procedure. And so when we have a culture that always questions it and always stays focused on independence and success for the individuals we serve, I think that it creates a healthy space to not get stuck in doing something that's more restrictive than we need to. But Tyra, Sarah, I'm sure you have other thoughts.
Sarah, do you have thoughts?
I was gonna say, go for it.
I mean, I really appreciate the process that you walk through, Kyle, and your points, Steve. And frankly, as someone that has worked across the age span, I think that those of us that have worked with or work with adults probably have a much more structured approach to this than people that have only ever worked with very young children, because I think that we are much more likely to take away an item from a child or physically pick up and move a child. Now, I'm not saying we should do either of those things. I'm just saying I think that culturally that's more accepted. And then legally, you know, if you work with adults, you know, like if that adult purchase something with their money, you can't legally take it away from them without some very specific things in place first. And so I think that the process that adult providers go through would really be beneficial for those working with young kids in EIBI to learn more about, to be quite honest with you. And I think part of the purpose of our book was to highlight those moments that you, and I'm going to say intuition, but like, listen, if you want to be behavior analytic about it, I think those are situations where you are responding to something in the environment or an internal thought or something in your history, and you're just not quite able to discriminate and tact it, but their stimuli are still there. So I don't mean intuition as like literally just this made up fictional thing. But I think that those moments are moments to sit with that feeling and engage in those self-reflective questions that you were talking about, Kyle, versus like, nope, I'm the behavior analyst and I know what's best for, which kind of gets to your point, Steve, right? So like, just because something would be more efficient doesn't mean that it would be the most socially valid, or the thing, if you took an evidence-based practice framework, that it would be the thing that you should implement. And I think the other thing, when you're working with adults, to the degree that they can be involved, this is true with children as well, but especially legally with adults, involving them, and also finding ways within your workplace to have checks and balances for when they're making a decision that doesn't sit right with you, but they're legally able to make that decision, whether or not it's because, you know, something in your history, or you have a bias against something and you don't agree with the choice they're making, or it's a really tough choice. Like, for example, I worked with an adult who had Leishman, and this individual was cognitively intact, but engaged in really, really serious self-injurious behavior that was and when I say life-threatening, I mean very planned attempts to unsubscribe from life. And as an adult, they made a decision to have all of their bottom teeth removed because they had bitten off the tips of all of their fingers, despite being in physical restraints almost all the time. And many of us thought like, no, there are other things that we can do in the environment. it was really hard to sit with that decision that that person made, because also we had these competing thoughts of, we're failing you. If you have to take that extreme, we're failing you. But this was also someone who was exercising agency and autonomy
Mhm.
over their own body. And as a human, and particularly one with a uterus, I very much value being able to make decisions about your own body. And that was really, I was young when that happened. I was probably 25. And that was a real rough time. And I didn't have an ethics book or training I could go to that helped me navigate that. So I think more than anything, the point is, have these conversations and understand they feel hard and heavy and yucky, and we're not always gonna always agree personally, but we probably, if we center our clients, we can come to an agreement that honors the goal of what is best for them, right? So there's no easy answer to this question.
Yeah, and I probably set you guys up for a rough one. Anyways, I know we were talking to Cody along the same lines about assent, consent, and oftentimes we have people coming out of prisons or jail or other court orders for, not guilty by reason of insanity or other, you know, uh, findings that we have to try to change behavior that they don't necessarily want to change. And so it is very much okay, what is your goal? How can we help you meet your goal of re-entering society or whatever it is? You may not like, all the steps we have to take to get there, but here's the roadmap to reach that. And that's kind of the approach we've taken, even though it often seems like, the government's saying, hey, you can't withhold any reinforcers to use later, during while we're trying to teach those new responses.
Yeah, and I think, Steve, that what you sort of hinted at was, you're involving the individuals in a full description of
Mhm.
what this path is, and sometimes that is the farthest we can get with having them collaborate, is just that we're explaining things to them in a way, using language that is understandable, but that also makes space for, like, this sucks, like, this fully sucks, and this is the reason that we're in this situation, and this is the reason it's feeling sucky, and this is where we're going to get to the other point where hopefully it doesn't suck anymore, right? So and somebody might be like, Tyra, that sounds really acty. Yes, I get it. And also, just tacting things is behavior analytic too.
Switching gears just a little bit, I was curious, just with your involvement in the BACB and with the history of the ethical code, kind of the evolution of where our ethical standards kind of started into what it is now today, and then if there's anything or any conversation or any sort of idea of like maybe where it might be headed in the future. I don't know, that's kind of a loaded question. I don't know if that's a good one or not, but I was curious.
Yeah, I'll say, I don't think we can't speak on behalf of the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, obviously, because
Sure.
we don't work there anymore. And even if we did, we couldn't, because only the CEO, I think, can speak on behalf of that organization. But I hope that the ethics code follows its past trajectory, which is that it has been revised and has been shaped by how our practice and profession is evolving. Um, Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about, like, the history piece, like, just that, this, we're not giving trade secrets. These are things that exist in published documents, but um, many, given that more than more than 50% of at least certified individuals by the BACB have been certified 5 or fewer years, and I think 80% 10 or fewer years. More and more of y'all are going to only be familiar with the current ethics code, but those of us that have been around before the BACB even existed, we remember different situation, right? So maybe do you want to outline that real quickly, Kyle? I mean, Sarah.
Well, and I will interject real quick. It wasn't meant to be a gotcha question. It was interesting though, reading the history and kind of the dynamic responsiveness to it, bringing in the subject matter experts and things, the level of care that goes into responding to some of the things that maybe some of the society is saying, what other BCBAs are saying, what our clientele are saying, and taking all those into consideration. So that's kind of where I was going with that. But go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I'll throw out there, if you want to listen to another podcast about the history of ethics, there is one on the BACB website. And then if you want to do some light reading before bed to read through how the ethics codes were created, including all the SME information that you shared, Kyle, that's also in a paper, I believe it's in BAP, but I can drop a link in 30 seconds. But basically, in the beginning of the BACB, there were disciplinary standards. I think those came out around probably 99. And then conduct guidelines were also added. It was a separate document, but those that's probably more similar to what we see in the ethics code today. But the disciplinary standards were basically outlining, here, if you do these things, we will have to take action, particularly related to certification. And then the guidelines were more along the lines of, here's how to be a responsible behavior analyst, and here are the things you should be doing. They were both revised a few times, and then they identified that it needed to be actionable, and it got to a point where the BACB had enough staff members. Thanks, Tyra, for dropping that in. They created an actionable ethics code, which is the professional and ethics code for behavior analysts, that came out in 2016. Depending how long you've been certified, you probably remember. And then obviously there was an updated version that came out in 2022. And then with that, if you remember when the RBT credential came out, there was like that red RBT that was on the ethics code, and highlighting like, here are the ones that are also relevant to RBTs. And then they came out with their RBT ethics code in 2018. And then that was updated again to when the other one came out in 2020 or 2022 is when it became actionable, to kind of match the ethics code for behavior analysts. But that's a very quick version. If you want to know more about the SMEs and what was taken, what other ethics codes were reviewed, et cetera, that's all in that paper.
Perfect. I will definitely include that in the show notes. Go ahead, Steve.
As I say, I think to maybe clarify, Kyle, or redirect it to my question, with the changing in societal norms, how do you see that being integrated into making those decisions? What was acceptable back in the 70s and 80s obviously is very much frowned upon now. And I often see something that back when, you and I were coming through and finishing school, nowadays would be looked upon and be like, oh, geez, I can't believe you guys were doing that. And scientifically speaking, there is not this right or wrong. It's just it's effective or it's not. The apple isn't bad for falling on someone's head. That's just physics. But obviously we have with, human populations we're working with, we have to make sure we're meeting these societal norms. And first, is there kind of a process that you see that, or is it kind of like a fluid thing that it just follows naturally? And then with your book, how do you plan ahead for that sort of thing, those changing things, to make sure it stays relevant moving forward?
Yeah. I think what we tried to do was hit on the processes that facilitate fluency with thinking about ethics in general, and strategies that would be appropriate to build those skills, and then also help engage in whatever kind of behavior you need to, whether it's writing a policy or working on a treatment plan that maximizes doing so in a way that considers ethics, and then maybe how to approach a situation if something feels wonky in terms of misconduct, outside of some very specific thing that is like the flavor of the month for behavior analysis right now, or that was something that was done or language that was used in the past that is no longer acceptable. So we really tried to stay away from that with the book, right? Like, in terms of the ethics code, I think it will continue to evolve, but it's slow because scientific practices kind of need to evolve, public expectations need to evolve, and then for an organization like a certifying body to give guidance or mandate something, there needs to be proper foundational, like scholarly work for it. So often our practice may be our the evolution of our practice may be a little bit ahead of the expectations or the guidance in a code of ethics. Because, for example, if you take assent, that's something y'all have mentioned a couple of times. That's something in animal behavior research and work that has been there a long time. Because, like, if a wolf doesn't want to work with you, they're going to let you know in a really dangerous way. So you have to be concerned with assent in that context. And then, it's mandated in certain research contexts, but only recently has it really found a place to be talked about in a conceptually systematic way relative to identifying assent and assent withdrawal. And not saying people haven't been doing work in a long time, but I just mean as a practice more generally talked about in our profession. But there aren't a lot of empirical studies that talk about, these are the ways that you can identify assent withdrawal and those sorts of things. And so it stands to reason that a certifying body couldn't, for example, include things in the test content outline on a practice that doesn't yet have scholarly literature that could form instruction in a graduate degree program towards that content, right? So sometimes I think our practice is going to evolve faster than something like a code of ethics. But I do think that we have a pretty good history of that code of ethics or code of conduct evolving. It's slow and probably not as fast as we wanted to. So I don't know if that answers your question, or Em or Sarah, if you have other things to add.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense in the format, at least. And I have to admit, I haven't read the book yet. Just hearing about it, though, is kind of to have those conversations on a regular basis and guide those decision making so you can evolve more quickly than maybe the BACB or any other governing body would be able to. And so it seems like your setup is already planning for potential changes and alterations, whereas others may not be able to be. And so that seems very cool to me.
And I would add evolve as opposed to avoid or go rogue and kind of, just do what makes sense to you. So it calls for self-reflection and contemplation every day on the decisions you make, and a constant reevaluation of yourself. Is what I'm doing lining up with my definition of ethics and with my certifying body's definition of ethics and what's best for this person? So yeah, I think the book does a really good job of providing that framework without, like you said, being a textbook saying this is this and this is that. So yeah. We're kind of nearing the end of our hour. I will add, I thought it was very cool you included a QR code for a playlist of music. I think more books should do that. I definitely am a Spotify user, so that was beneficial. If I wanted to purchase the book, where and how would I do so? This is your plug.
I believe it's on the ABA Technologies website. I think it's also on Amazon as well. And Tyra, is there still a link through APBA? So if you're an APBA member, you can find, yes, Tyra shared the link, and Kyle, I'm sure you'll share that. But
yeah, lots of links coming through. They will definitely be shared. We're nearing the.
I do just want to really, really quickly say, because I didn't give a disclaimer at the beginning, and I know you'll probably put it in the text, but just a disclaimer that I'm not here repping the Association of Applied Behavior Analysis. You're just getting plain old Tyra. However, if you are an APBA member, there is a discount code on the website in the members only section for the book. So there's the link to it at ABA Technologies, which is awesome. And also you can get a little discount if you're a member.
Awesome. Discounts are always good. Thank you all so much for being here. This was a really, really incredible conversation. Thanks for being part of this series, and we'll let you go from there. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.